Kia ora tātou, and thank you to our presenters today who have joined this live Q&A session, as well as all of our attendees who are logging in now across Asia. Thank you very much for giving up your time to join us. I'd like to firstly start by introducing Jeroen Prinsen. Jeroen is the Asia Pacific Regional Director for QS, who has presented today on using university rankings for developing partnerships and measuring success. We also have on the way, I think there might be a couple of technical difficulties, but Dr. Stephen Holmes, who many of you would have watched his presentation as well. Stephen is the founder and principal of 5Rs Partnerships, who presented on the 21st century approaches to benchmarking universities. Stephen will also be joined shortly by Professor Duc Huang, who has recently developed the UPM rating system for universities, as Stephen also touched on during his presentation. So a very warm welcome to all of you, and kia ora koutou, and we'll get started. I think we do have some questions coming through, and I'll quickly check the Q&A box. Jeroen, I'll start this one with you. Is attracting the best scholars and faculty a good strategy for university rankings and internationalization? What's your view in this?
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for the question. I guess it really depends on how you define the best scholars and academics. Obviously, you know, when you immediately think of a best scholar and a best academic, you start to think about what their output is like, what their research networks are like, what sort of international scope those researchers and academics have. And generally speaking, when it comes to, and again, I'm focused on research here a little bit, you know, those with a good broad international network tend to be quite active in their field of research. And research shows that research paper collaborations internationally provide a bigger citation impact. And if you look at the rankings agencies, most of them have an element of citations as a measure of score, and that does feed into rankings. But the key thing here is the underlying value of what the researchers and academics bring to the table, and that would be the expertise in their field of research, their networks and their connections, you know, and that's not just even their research connections, but also connections to enabling additional funding for their research. So yeah, it's a sort of a broad scope there, but some of that in essence does feed into a university's quality and impact, which ultimately does feed into their rankings as well. Thanks,
Jeroen. Another question, you started your presentation around the criteria with the different weightings against the different indicators. Do you think, given the current situation and then post-pandemic, do you think this will change the way QS evaluates universities?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that's come up a few times, especially around the international metrics, and especially when you start to look at the student numbers and international cohort. You know, there's a lot of talk around diversity of that cohort as well. Currently, you know, we measure it in terms of total or the ratio of international students versus domestic students. And those numbers obviously have been impacted over the last 18 months. As it stands now, we work with universities to allow them to maintain their pre-pandemic numbers. Going forward, we'll obviously be watching that space quite closely. But QS has always managed to establish a fairly consistent rankings methodology, and we don't necessarily want to make any major changes that will create big fluctuations in the rankings. We do like to try and keep it fairly consistent. So yeah, there's no immediate change at this point. But aside from the current pandemic and the lack of flow of international students, we obviously continue to evaluate our rankings and our indicators, and we want to make sure that they're relevant with the ongoing evolving ecosystem that we operate in. So yeah, we certainly will look to evolve and continue innovating, but we do that with keeping in mind not to create drastic fluctuation in the rankings outputs.
No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. One more here for you. Some non-English speaking universities are still not exposed to international rankings. Their quality is not bad, and they are capable of recruiting students and delivering good programs. Is it biased if some universities only refer to international rankings when deciding their partnerships? Is there a risk that they may miss a few good partners out there?
That's a good question, and thank you again for that question. I mean, it's important to stipulate that rankings isn't necessarily the be all and end all, even though that is the theme of my presentation in terms of using international rankings for partnerships. But I think one should use that as a measure and consider other elements that the university has to offer. In terms of the English speaking versus non-English speaking, the indicators are meant to be agnostic to location and language used. And you start to look at research collaboration trends. There's certainly high impact in collaborating with countries like the US and the UK. But there's also high impact in research collaborating with countries like China, where predominantly a lot of the research is in local language Chinese, and the same applies in countries and languages outside of English around the world. So I don't think that should be a deterrent for partnerships for universities. The partnership really should be enveloped around the capabilities that partner A can offer partner B, and vice versa, and that's the fundamental value that the two can bring together in their collaboration moving forward.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next question. There's a question that had come through the Q&A box. I think I'll try to read it verbatim, but it was around whether there is training available for universities, whether it's from, I assume it was meaning training from QS. Are you able to share any details around any engagement that QS has directly with institutions in this space?
Sure. I mean, QS is fundamentally a higher education services partner. And, rankings is one element of what QS is known for, but we also work closely with universities to support improvements in their overall performance. And that includes the potential to provide analytics tools to assess an individual university's performance, whether that be through analysis of research publications, reputation scores, or anything that really builds in towards brand reputation building too. So, we also support universities through our conferencing platforms and publications, but we also help universities with recruitment services, as well as internationalization, as in partnership and mobility management tools. So there's quite a broad array of what we do that ties together to support universities' internationalization strategy and ultimate performance improvement. So yeah, I mean, I'll hold it there because I could go on for a long time talking about QS services there.
No, that's okay. More than happy to talk more about that. There's another question you mentioned around recruitment. There's a question here tied into that. What is your view about the quality of the students enrolled in correlation with how well a university performs in rankings?
That's a good question, and it would be great to measure the quality of the students. I guess part of that is down to each individual university's, I guess, cutoff in terms of the requirements for enrollment of a student in terms of their prior performance. I think, you know, it's an interesting discussion in terms of those students. I guess if you're talking about undergraduate research, undergraduates versus postgraduates, and postgraduates are more involved in the research ecosystem, which ultimately feeds into the performance of the university. Undergraduates, I guess, is measured in a slightly different manner. But yeah, not sure I have more to add there in terms of the quality of the students, but it is an interesting question that feeds through to potentially the postgrads and ultimately if they stay on at the university or not.
Thank you. I'll continue with this question as well. Sorry, I'm firing a few your way. Do we, this being we a university, need to set KPIs for universities' management and staff in order to get them moving in the same direction? I assume this is talking about ensuring that the academics are working hand in hand with management. Is that a challenge that you see in this space as well, Ewan?
Yeah, I think in terms of any university's performance, it's critical to set some clear KPIs so that there is common alignment across a university towards a certain goal. You know, universities are vast organizations with a tremendous amount of talent in those organizations, but you know, sometimes if you have different faculties traveling in different directions, you know, the overall value and strength of the university may not be realized. So having a common set of KPIs is often very helpful, and having a sort of a broader KPI that can be rankings related can ultimately help feed behaviors and direction across the university to drive improvement on overall performance. You know, and so there's certainly a number of KPIs that can be put in place, and if you look at strategic plans of different universities around the world, some universities have these readily available on their websites, and you can clearly see some very clear KPIs in place for those universities. So, you know, if you were looking for your own university, it might be good to see what best practices out there already in terms of KPIs for universities. And I know a lot of the New Zealand universities do have publicly available KPIs across a 5-year strategic plan, for example.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sharon. We're quickly running out of time. I'm going to ask you this final question. It's a broad one, but we'll give you about a minute to try and answer it. How can universities, in your opinion, be competitive on the global stage while not losing their core local values?
Great question. I think it's definitely important to keep those core local values, and you know, research sometimes, you know, we talk about researchers having to be of global importance and globally relevant. You know, sometimes that's not always the case, and research might be quite unique to certain country environments. Doesn't mean to say that that's not impactful research or that's not critically important. Even more so now when you start to look at repurposing of research, certainly in certain scientific and medical fields. So, you know, I think that core value is important, but you do have to think about your global audience as well. And how can you present your capabilities that's going to be globally relevant at the same time as maintaining those core values. So it's not easy to do, but it's certainly important to keep both of those in mind.
Yeah, a very fine balance, I'm sure. Well, thank you, Huron. Thank you very much for answering all those questions. I think we got through a fair bit then. So again, thank you, and thank you to all of the attendees who have joined, and we'll see some of you a little bit later. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you got a lot of insights and